Hello everyone, this is Srinivas Murthy L from SM Edudex. Welcome all of you to my classes. Today we have discussed about the neoclassical utility analysis of consumer demand. Before that, we should know about the classical theory of development about consumer behavior. We have studied already that microeconomics deals with the pricing of commodities and services. The price of commodity depends upon the demand for and the supply of it. The theory of demand explains the demand for a commodity and the factors determining it. The classical economist believed that the price of commodity depended on its demand and supply, but they neglected the demand aspect and studied the supply aspect. Cost of production. Because of this lopsided approach, they could not arrive at the price theory properly. Mere utility, that means value in use, could not determine the price of commodity. That is, the value in use cannot determine the value in exchange of a commodity. Adam Smith argued that through diamonds were less useful than water. The former had high value. If utility was the cause of value, how could this come about? Posing this question, he abandoned the demand utility factor as a determinant of value of commodity. It took nearly a century to develop demand theory as a center of price theory. The demand theory was developed by the English economists, particularly Stanley Jevons and Alfred Marshall. The neoclassical utility analysis of consumer demand. The neoclassical utility analysis refers to the theory of consumer demand as built by Marshall, Pigou and others. The theory is based on the cardinal measurement of utility. Cardinal measurement of utility and researches upon certain hedonistic or utilitarian premises. We know about the word utility. The word utility denotes the want satisfying power of a commodity or services. Stanley Jevons was the first economist who conceived the concept of utility like other economists. Jevons was also confronted with the problem of determining the fundamental basis of demand and came to the conclusion that it is the ability of commodity to satisfy demand that constitutes the basis for demand. In other words, it is the want satisfying power of commodity or a service which determines the demand for commodity. Jevons called this utility. This concept utility is subjective and introspective. It depends on mental attitude, emotions of consumer. It has no physical or material existence. It cannot be it cannot be equated with usefulness. A commodity may not be useful, but it may have utility for a particular person. The terms carries no moral or legal significance. A commodity may be frivolous, injurious, or even pernicious, but if it is satisfies an economic want, it possesses utility. Poison, wine, and cigarettes are dangerous for health. Persons who are aware of it may not use them. These things do not possess utility for them, since they are wanted by others. They have utility. Utility is thus subjective and does not carry any ethical connotation. And we know about utility and satisfaction. Strictly speaking, the term utility and satisfaction are different. The former stands for expected satisfaction, whereas the later satisfaction realized. When a consumer wants to buy a commodity, he thinks about the utility of the commodity or how much of satisfaction the commodity is capable of giving. Only after purchasing and consuming the commodity, he realizes the satisfaction. In practice, that satisfaction may not be as expected. There may be a gap between utility and satisfaction. When expected satisfaction is not realized after consumption, it would be a guidance for the consumer to choose or not that commodity in future. Another distinction between the two is that utility can be measured indirectly by means of the price paid to the commodity. But satisfaction cannot be measured either by direct or indirect methods. In spite of these differences, the two terms utility and satisfaction are discussed in the economics on equal footing. Utility and satisfaction are synonymous in economic analysis. In the theory of consumer behavior, this assumption has been made for purpose of convenience. Measurement of utility. As indicated, utility is a subjective and mental concept which cannot be measured precisely, but there is a rough way of measuring utility contained in a commodity to consumer. This indirect measurement is possible through the price paid by the consumer to purchase the commodity. Generally, if the consumer pays a higher price for a commodity, the utility in the commodity is supposed to be higher. If consumer is prepared to pay 1 rupee for commodity A and 2 rupee for commodity B, then the utility of B is twice that of A. In other words, the utility of two commodities for a consumer can be measured by the price that B is willing to pay for them. But this analysis will not be correct beyond the individual. Suppose Mr. X is prepared to pay 5 rupees for the commodity A, for which our first consumer is willing to pay only 1 rupee. Does this mean that the second consumer, Mr. X, gets a larger utility from the commodity A? Need not. It is possible that the second consumer, Mr. X, may be very rich and in a position to pay more for the same commodity. In spite of this defect, money is a made the measuring rod of utility. It is employed to draw inference about the utilities of various goods and services, through it is an imperfect one. Economists are placed in better position than other social scientists as the former have at least a rough, crude and imperfect method of measuring the motives of the people through money, whereas the latter have no measuring rod. Economists are aware of the imperfections and limitations of this analysis. Cardinal and ordinary utility. There are two basic approaches to discuss the consumer demand theory. The one is called classical approach. In the utility, satisfaction has been made measurable. This is called the cardinal utility approach. The second approach dispenses with the measurement of utility or comparing utility in quantities, as this is not a realistic one, and take up analysis of the preference of consumer. On the basis of preference, the commodities are ordered or ranked as first, second, third, etc. This is called the ordinal utility approach. The Marshallian demand analysis is based on the concept of cardinal utility, which assumes that utility is measurable and additive. It is expressed as a quantity measured in hypothetical units, which are called utils. If consumer imagines that one mango has 8 utils and an apple 4 utils, it implies that the utility of one mango is twice that of an apple. Assumption of utility analysis. The method of measuring utility is based on the set of assumptions. It assumes that the consumer is a rational being who calculates and measures, chooses and compares the utilities of different units of the various commodities and thus maximize utility. He possesses a perfect knowledge of the choices open to him and that the choices are certain. The prices of the various commodities are not influenced by variations in their prices. It is further assumed that there are no substitutes and that the utilities are measurable in terms of money. The entire Marshallian utility analysis comprising the law of diminishing marginal utility, the law of maximum satisfaction, the concept of consumer surplus, and the law of demand is based on these assumptions. Before we deal with these notions, it is instructive to study the relationship between total utility and marginal utility. Total utility versus marginal utility. According to Professor Mayer's, total utility is the amount of satisfaction derived from the consumption of or possession of a good. Marginal utility, on the other hand, is utility or satisfaction derived from one unit of that commodity. According to Professor Boulding, marginal utility of any quantity of commodity is the increase in total utility, which results from a unit increases in consumption. Another one, Professor Bilas points out that marginal utility is defined as the change in total utility resulting from a 1 unit change in the consumption of the good in question per unit of time. To put it shortly, total utility is the total satisfaction derived in consuming all the quantities of a commodity in possession or purchased. Marginal utility is the utility or satisfaction derived in consuming just 1 unit of that commodity. It follows that the total utility of commodity is the sum total of marginal utilities of units composing the commodity. Suppose the consumer purchases a packet of biscuits, total utility or satisfaction derived refers to the utilities of the all biscuits in the packet. Marginal utility refers to the a single biscuit in the packet. If all biscuits in the packet are alike, the marginal utility may be represented. Okay. Every commodity possesses utility for the consumer. When the consumer buys apples, he receives them in units 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. 2 apples have more utility than 1, 3 more utility than 2, and 4 more than 3. The units of apples which the consumer chooses are in descending order of their utilities. In his estimation, the first apple is the best out of the lot available to him and thus gives him the highest satisfaction, measured as 20 utils. The second apple will naturally be the second best with a lesser amount of utility than the first and as 15 utils. The third apple has 10 utils and the fourth 5 utils. Total utility connotes the sum total of utilities obtained by the consumer from different units of a commodity. In our illustration, the total utility of 2 apples is 35, that is 20 plus 15 utils. Of 3 apples, 45, 20 plus 15 plus 10 utils. And of 4 apples, 50, 20 plus 15 plus 10 plus 5. Marginal utility is the addition made to total utility by having an additional unit of the commodity. The total utility of the 2 apples is 35 utils. When the consumer consumes the third apple, the total utility becomes 45 utils. Thus, marginal utility of the third apple is that 10 utils. 45 minus 35 is 10. In other words, marginal utility of a commodity is the loss in utility if 1 unit less is consumed. Algebraically, the marginal utility of n units of a commodity is the total utility of n units minus the total utility of n minus 1. Thus, mu of nth unit is equal to total of n units minus total utility of n minus 1. mu of nth unit is equal to total utility of n units minus total utility of n minus 1. Okay. Units of apples. We have discussed about the total utility and marginal utility in the help of the table. Units of apples is shown in first column. total utility in second column and marginal utility in third column. Units of apples 0, total utility is 0 and marginal utility is also 0. Next, units of apple 1, we hit 1 apple, first apple. Utility, total utility is 20 and marginal utility also 20. Then we consume second apple, total utility is 35 and marginal utility is 15. 35 minus 20, 15. Third one, total utility 45, marginal utility is 10. 45 minus 35, 10. Then fourth units of apple, total utility is 50 and marginal utility is 5. 50 minus 45, 5. Then fifth units of apple, total utility is 50, marginal utility is 0. 50 minus 50, 0. Then the sixth apple, 45 total utility, marginal utility is minus 5. 45 minus 50 minus 5. Then seventh unit of apples, total utility is 35, marginal utility is minus 10. 35 minus 45 is equal to minus 10. So long as total utility is increasing, marginal utility is decreasing up to the fourth unit. When total utility is maximum at the fifth unit, marginal utility is 0. It is the point of satiety for the consumer. When total utility is decreasing, marginal utility is negative, the sixth and the seventh units. These units gives disutility or dissatisfaction. So it is no use having them. This has been shown in the figure also. See here, in the OX axis, OX axis represents the units of apple, and in the OY axis utility, total utility and marginal utility. TU is the total utility curve and MU is the marginal utility curve. This relationship is shown in the figure where TU is the total utility curve and MU is the marginal utility curve. So long as the total utility curve is rising, the marginal utility curve is falling. When the farmer reaches the highest point Q, the latter touch the x-axis at C where utility is 0. When the total utility starts falling from Q to TU, the MU becomes negative from onwards. There is no use of consumption. Okay, thank you. Please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon. Thank you one and all.